Book of Ecclesiastes, book that is often neglected in the Bible because it has some confusing lines in it, some confusing verses, and so what happens is people tend to neglect it, and yet it has some valuable lessons for us to learn. We've entitled the message, The Vain Life. And that's what life is if you do not understand the purposes behind life and you do not understand what it is to know the living God. So the book of Ecclesiastes really asks this question: does life have any meaning? Does it have any meaning? And if you ask some people, they might say, there's no God. Nothing after you die. You live, you die, and that's it. And that's their view on life, and we're going to see that he'll be mentioning what comes out of that kind of view. Others might believe in God as a higher power, but he may not have a personal relationship with anybody. He just sort of put the universe into effect, threw it loose, and said, have at it. And so they approach God in that way, and they approach life in that way. And God then is impersonal and has no involvement in the affairs of mankind. And you'll find the author, more than likely Solomon, though some disagree with that, but he seems to be Solomon by the words he says. The preacher, he calls himself, the son of David, king in Jerusalem, so it seems to be an indication there. Wrestling with these things in life that are so ordinary, so happening all the time. So what is it all about? And he uses some key words that helps us with that wrestling. For instance, one of the words that you'll read over and over again in the book of Ecclesiastes is under the sun. Under the sun. 26 times in 12 chapters he uses the term under the sun. And 3 times the term under heaven. Same basic idea. In Ecclesiastes 1:3, what does a man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? And then in verse 13 of chapter 1, I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He's discouraged. He's trying to figure out life, but he's trying to figure it out under the sun, under heaven. In other words, he's trying to figure out the purpose of life, and ultimately we're going to discover that without God, without the gospel, there is no real purpose to life. And this is where hopefully he's going to bring us to as we get to chapter 12. Example, Ecclesiastes 3:19. What happens to the children of man and what happens to the beast is the same. Now, what happens, of course, is when he's doing this thinking of under the sun, he's like a man pondering. And he's not necessarily drawing upon divine revelation. He's just pondering life. And so he comes to this statement. Okay, what happens to men and what happens to beasts? It's the same. They die. And then they all have the same breath. And man has no advantage over the beast, for all of it is vanity. Now, that's his conclusion under the sun, as he's just thinking about life. And then what he's trying to do is he's trying to bring us from point A, life under the sun, to point B. This is how you get meaning out of life. You get to know who God is. And that's what we'll see when we get to the end of the book. Chapter 3, verse 20, all go to one place. Now, of course, we know from the Bible that's not true, but in fact, that's why cultic people love this book, because they can say, look, people die, they all go to the same place, the animal, the people. No, that's not what it's saying. He's saying as he ponders life, if you ponder life without an understanding of God and who he is, you may come to these kinds of conclusions. So he says, all go to one place, all are from dust, and to dust they return. Who knows? See, that's what who knows? See, now we can say we know by divine inspiration, but he's just looking under the sun. Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of beast goes down to the earth. Who knows? Well, of course, apart from God telling us, we wouldn't know. We would only have to do what he's doing here, and that is speculate. And what, of course, he's going to do is he's going to bring us in our speculation from we do know. Here's what we know and can know. So he uses other words like vanity. 27 times he uses the word vanity. The vanity of Ecclesiastes 1:2. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, always vanity. Now the word vanity can mean unsatisfactory, but it also has another meaning in the text, and it means transitory. In other words, here's what happens. You get up and life is almost over. Now, when you're a kid, you don't think about how fast life goes by. But I bet if you're over 50, you've been doing some thinking about how fast it's gone by. Wow, what happened to life? I mean, wow, it just went by. And if you're 70, then you say it is really going by. And it speeds up as you get older, even though it's the same time frame, but it seems like, whoosh, the days just disappear. And so in Ecclesiastes 1:14, I've seen everything. He's talking about striving now. I've seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity, transitory, and trying to figure out that, it's striving after the wind. He says that 9 times in the text. Striving after the wind. You just can't get a hold of it, he says. And what he's trying to do is get our attention shifted. He used the word wise 22 times in those 12 chapters. Ecclesiastes 10:2, a wise man's heart inclines him to the right, but a fool's heart to the left. And so he is saying that wisdom will bring you in one direction, foolishness will bring you in another direction. Now the writer will show the difference between earthly wisdom and wisdom that ends up in faith in God. And we'll see that earthly wisdom is no better than no wisdom, because you come to these kind of conclusions. Okay, I'm really smart. I'm going to die and that's it. I'm really smart and I'm going to be just like an animal when I die. I'm really smart and then you keep come to these conclusions. And so he wants to get us to the point where he says, no, I want you to go beyond that, and I want you to see something beyond the life that we just live on earth. He uses the word folly 7 times. Ecclesiastes 2:13. Then I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than in folly. So there is some better then. It's better to be smart than dumb. Would you agree with that? I think so, right? More gain in wisdom than in folly. And there is more gain in light. It's better to do the right things, have the right direction, than the wrong things, than in darkness. So there is some advantages to that. But the folly in life is that if you all end up the same, what's the difference? So this book examines how vain life is if there is no God and no afterlife. And it brings us to the point where he wants us to see, if you're trying to live life without God, you are living a life of vanity, a life of hopelessness. And he wants to bring us to an understanding of why we need to put our lives in the hands of God and come to know who he is. Now, if you're over 50, you probably know who Peggy Lee is. If you're under 50, you should go on YouTube and check her out. She did a number of good songs when I was a teenager, and one of them was, Is That All There Is? I don't know if you remember that, but I'm going to give you the words if you don't. And she sang in a sort of wonderful way. You should watch it on YouTube. You'll love it. But here's what she begins the song with this, and she speaks the words at first. I remember when I was a little girl, our house caught on fire. I never forgot the look on my father's face as he gathered me up in his arms and raced through the burning building out to the pavement. I stood there shivering in my pajamas and watched the whole world go up in flames. And when it was all over, I said to myself, is that all there is to a fire? And then the chorus goes in like this. Is that all there is? Is that all there is? If that's all there is, my friends, then let's keep dancing. Let's break out the booze and have a ball. If that's all there is. And then she moves along in the period of life. She's now 12, and she speaks this. And when I was 12 years old, my father took me to a circus, the greatest show on earth. There were clowns and elephants and dancing bears, and a beautiful lady in pink tights flew high above our heads. And so I sat there watching the marvelous spectacle. I had the feeling that something was missing. I don't know what, but when it was over, I said to myself, is that all there is to a circus? And then she goes into the chorus again. If that's all there is, let's break out the booze and have a ball. If that's all there is. And then she speaks again. Then I fell in love. Head over heels in love with the most wonderful boy in the world. We would take long walks by the river. We'd just sit for hours gazing into each other's eyes. We were so very much in love. Then one day, he went away. And I thought, I'd die. But I didn't. And when I didn't, I said to myself, is that all there is to love? And then again, if that's all there is, let's break out the booze and have a ball, if that's all there is. And then she gets to the point in the song and she says, I know you must be saying to yourselves, if that's the way she feels about it, why doesn't she just end it all? Oh no, not me. I'm not in a hurry for that final disappointment. For I know just as well as I'm standing here talking to you, when that final moment comes and I'm breathing my last breath, I'll be saying to myself, is that all there is? Is that all there is? If that's all there is, my friends, then let's keep dancing. Let's break out the booze and have a ball, if that's all there is. That's the message of Ecclesiastes. And he's trying to get us to the point where we understand is that's not all there is. And life without God ends up being meaningless. And he wants to get us to the point of seeing our desperate need of a understanding of why we exist and who created us and where we're going and how we should be living life. So the design of the book is to point out the absurdity of life. If there is no God, no judgment, no afterlife. And then it will bring us to this conclusion in chapter 12. And hopefully in these 4 weeks we'll see that unfold. Chapter 12, 13, the end of the matter. Let me settle it for you, saying, all has been heard. I've given you all the arguments. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. And verse 14, for God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. And what he's saying is this, even if you don't have all the answers to life, even if you can't figure out everything that's happening, you don't need all the answers. You need God. You need faith in God. You need to know about the end game and that you're going to meet God. And so we want to look today at 4 areas the preacher explored that make no sense to him at that particular moment, if that's all there is. The first thing we want to talk about is the vanity of intellectual pursuit. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 12. I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out wisdom, all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. Now, the word he uses for God here is the word Elohim. It's not God the Father kind of idea. It's just the Creator. And what he's saying here is it's unhappy to gain a whole bunch of information. Look at verse 14. I have seen everything that's done under the sun, and behold, it's all vanity and a striving after the wind. It's transitory. You could have a PhD, and the answer is, you're still going to die. It's all going to disappear one day. And the preacher had a good, thorough, the best education money could buy. But here's what he discovered. Education does not supply all of life's answers. You just can't learn it all. You just can't know it all. It's not possible. Ecclesiastes 1:15, what is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. And then he says, I said in my heart, I've acquired great wisdom, surpassing all those who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge, and I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly, and I perceive this is also but a striving after the wind. For in much wisdom, listen to this line, is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. Did you know the more you know, the more you can hurt? For instance, when I was young, you don't remember black and white TV, do you? News was 3 stations. We had 3 stations in this area, 3, 6, and 10. And you had news, a news hour at night, but you didn't have 24-hour news, nothing like that. And when something happened in the world, you probably didn't hear about it for a while. But now, if a tsunami hits, if a war breaks out, if famine breaks out, when do you hear about it? Immediately. Immediately. See, the more you know in this world, without any hope in God, the more you would be led to despair. This is a pretty messed up place. It's crooked and it can't be straightened out. And under the sun, just reasoning could lead me into a very depressive state. And so I need to be careful. You know, there's an old saying, ignorance is bliss. The reason that is because knowledge is pain. Even if you have the best of life, and I have a wonderful life, but when I watch some things on television, I have internal pain because we live in such a broken, fallen world. And listen, if education and accumulation of information were the key to a well-lived life, shouldn't we see that evidence on the college campus? Is that what we see today on the college campus? I see discontentment, unrest, brokenness, and stupidity all around campuses today. Why? Because they're searching for all the wrong things. And they think just getting an education, that's what we think is, what they need is more education. And that'll fix it. I don't think we're doing too well on that, because that doesn't fix it. Without the knowledge of God in eternity, we are merely striving after the wind. So there's the vanity of intellectual pursuit. Then there's the vanity of self-indulgence. I know how I'll fix this. I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to make myself happy. And so Ecclesiastes 2:1, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. But behold, this also was vanity. This was also transitory. You know, after the night of partying, you know what you have to do the next day? Yeah, you have to get up. You have to wake up. You have to go to work. Or you might find yourself too broke to pay the rent because you thought you were having a good time. Chapter 2, verse 2, I said of laughter, it is mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? And our TV tells us, get all the gusto you can. But gusto without right understanding will lead you into trouble every time. He says in verse 3, I searched with my heart how to cheer my body with wine. I'm going to sit down and have a good time. My heart still guiding me with wisdom. In other words, I didn't get stupid drunk. But I just, I'm going to forget all my problems kind of thing. And then what he says is, and how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what is good for the children of men to do under heaven during the few days of their life. Now, God is not opposed to you having some pleasures in life and enjoying life and saying, thank you, Lord, for these things. But If you attempt to enjoy life without knowing who the author of life is and understanding the purposes of life, you will wake up and say, all is vanity. It's striving after the wind. The point is, you will not find heaven on earth by whether you get knowledge or whether you party, whatever it is. There is no heaven on earth. There is good, sometimes not so good, but there is no heaven on earth. And simply pleasure seeking, looking for those things that make you feel good, you will find are unfulfilling. Do not fill the holes in your heart that are saying to you, seek God. So he says in chapter 2, verse 2, what's the use of it? Why? It doesn't make any sense. And then he turns to doing something else. Okay, I've tried education. I've tried having the good life, so to speak, partying, enjoying myself. But now I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a name for myself. I'm going to build things. And so in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 4, I made great works. I built houses and painted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks and planted them all kinds of fruit trees. And I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had slaves who were born in my house. I had also great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me. I built it all. Then he said, I also gathered for myself silver and gold. I had it all. And the treasure of kings and provinces. And then I got singers, both men and women. They didn't have radio on that day. It was all live. I got singers. And then he said, and many concubines. That'll make them happy. Unless he puts them all in the same room. The delights of the sons of men. Man, I have had it all. How did he feel? He had wine, women, song, fame. How did he feel? It was all vanity. You know, sometimes I see these signs on the billboards, the lottery is up to this amount of money. And people, if only I could win the lottery. If only this would so change my life. Yeah, it might change your life, but I doubt it would be for good. And if you trace out the lives of people who get wealth quickly, you'll be surprised how often they destroy it and they lose it and they end up penniless. It's quite an amazing thing. I've often asked myself, how does a man lose $1 million or $2 million or $10 million? Yet it happens all the time in our society. J. Paul Getty was a very famous man, died recently, but he was, of course, very wealthy. The Getty Oil Company, Fortune magazine in 1957 said he was the richest living American. But he is a true example of money can't buy you love. It can't buy you happiness. It can't buy you joy. Getty was married and divorced 5 times. 5 times. Think about that. And Getty was a notorious womanizer besides that. Married and divorced 5 times and known to be running around with women all the time. Now, you think he was a happy man? Ecclesiastes 2:9. So I became great and surpassed all who are before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. People said, I'd like to be like Getty. Look at that man. He has it made. Again, the preacher says in chapter 2, verse 10, and whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil. I felt good. I'm building something. Something's happening. Something will remain. Something good. I'm building. That's what he's thinking. And then he says in verse 11, then I considered all that my hands had done and the toil I had expended in doing it, and behold, all was vanity. You know, recently I've been looking at some houses in town here, and someone says it's 100 years old, and I say, that's one I don't want. Do you know why? You ever do maintenance on a 100-year-old house? You know, just by sitting there, it begins to fall apart. I have never figured that out. I didn't do anything to it. I didn't hit it. And it's falling down. What happens? And so he says, I did all this building, but one day it's just all going to crumble. At the toil I extended in doing it, and he's saying, all was vanity and striving after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. If you don't have a God perspective, you're just living down here. What you see is everything you've done as crumbling one day and having no value. And that's exactly what happened to him. Now, how about getting? Here's what he was quoted as saying. A lasting relationship with a woman is only possible if you are a business failure. He said, I hate to be a failure. I hate and regret the failure of my marriages. I would gladly give all my millions for just one lasting marital success. How sad could that be? That you are the world's wealthiest man and you cannot even figure out how to be happily married. What a sad, sad testimony. And the reason is because of his philosophy. Not a godly one, rejected the philosophy of his parents. Listen to what his was. He had heard his parents, I'm sure, share the gospel many times over, but here's what he said. The meek shall inherit the earth, but not its mineral rights. Do you see something wrong with that guy? And this is chasing the wind. This is running after all the things that are meaningless and ultimately have no value. So there is the vanity of intellectual pursuit, the vanity of self-indulgence. Then there is the vanity of living wisely. You say, what's wrong with wisdom? Well, let's see what he says here. Ecclesiastes 2:12. So I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do that comes after the king? Or only what has already been done. Then he says this. Then I saw that there is more gain in wisdom, so it's better to be smart than dumb. It's better to use wisdom than folly. More gain in wisdom than folly, as there is more gain in light than darkness. There are some advantages to wisdom. But, verse 14, the wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I perceive that the same event happens to all of them. In other words, if you only live with worldly wisdom and you fail to see eternity and have an eternal perspective, all you can come up with is, you know what, I can walk out of here today, get in my car and get in a car accident and be all mangled up just like the fool. I can have my house catch fire just like the fool. I can be in the wrong place in the wrong time just like the fool. And then verse 15, then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? What did it pay off? And I said in my heart, this is also vanity. It makes no sense. And so in verse 16, for of the wise as of the fool, there is no enduring remembrance. And this is what's driving him crazy. He's wise, he's using things wisely, but he said, you know what? I'm building all this, and someday people will say, who built that? There's no enduring remembrance. Seeing that in the days to come, all will have long been forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool. And here is something sad. You are soon forgotten. Now, whether you know it or not, you will be soon forgotten. You say, well, not by my kids. Well, no, but by their kids, or the kids after. How many of you can name your great-great-grandfather? 1, 2, 3, 4. We got about 8. How about your great-great-great-great-grandfather? What happened? Oh, well, you could go to Ancestry.com, pay $50 and figure out who it is. But the reality is they're soon forgotten. Let me give you a little practice here. Who's Mike Pence? Vice President? Okay, who was Vice President before Mike Pence? Joe Biden. Before Joe Biden? Cheney. Before Cheney? Gore. Before Gore? Quail. We've got some historians here. And before quail. You got it. You got it. Somebody said, now, how many of you think you could have gotten all 5 of those like that? You know, and by the way, have you ever asked yourself, whatever happened to quail? I mean, we forget. They just slip away. And that's how it is in life. And you know, if you have $100 million and you give it to a college, they'll name it Rowan University or something like that. But who in the world is Rowan? I mean, do you understand that? I mean, you could pay money to have your name on a building, but people will one day say, well, who is he and what did he do? And this is the vanity that he's struggling with. Even as wise as I am, I'm going to die one day, and who cares? For a short time, somebody will say we miss him, and then life goes on. And then there's the vanity of toil. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 18. I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to a man who will come after me. And here's his problem, verse 19. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool? Yet he will be master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This is also vanity. Now, you know, Solomon, when he died, his son Rehoboam took over the kingdom, and he lost it very quickly. And all the gold items that were in the temple were given to Egypt to keep them from war, and he replaced them with bronze. The whole fortune disappeared really quick. And that's what happens often to people who get a fortune really quick. And he's saying, I don't even know. I've worked, I've accumulated all this. I don't even know if the person who's going to get it is smart enough to know how to handle it. And so that's a bit of vanity. Verse 20, so I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun. What in effect he is saying, why am I doing this? If my son should inherit it and blow it all, why am I doing this? And then he said, because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. Let me say this. If you are a parent here today, you know, I like to bless my kids, and I try and bless them, but the best heritage any parent can give to their child is a spiritual heritage. That is by far the best heritage. If you're going to leave your kids anything, leave them a track record of a mom and dad who loved God, who served God, and pass that on to your children. That is by far the best heritage. And if you're going to invest in your children spiritually. You'll be surprised. Ecclesiastes 2:22. What has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is vexation. Even in the night his heart does not rest. This is also vanity. Incidentally, when you build a lot, and when you are concerned about material possessions all the time, you don't sleep as well. Something happens. You're worried about this and this deal and that deal and this deal and that deal. There's nothing wrong with being a good businessman. What's wrong is when your business is under the sun instead of under the lordship of Jesus Christ. When you're living life without the knowledge and purpose of God in your life. And this is what is driving them nuts. And Solomon is getting to the place where we discover the self-led life versus the God-led life. And he's trying to get us from the self-led life to the God-led life. So that's what brings meaning to our lives. When we do it our way, we find it's all vanity. It's under the sun. So what's the conclusion? What difference does it make? None if there's not a day of eternity. If there's not a day of eternity, if that's all there is, then let's keep dancing. Let's break out the booze and have a ball. If life is just on this earth, and that is all there is, it really doesn't matter, because you're going to die and disappear. But if there's more, everything you do matters. And that's the point that Solomon's trying to bring us to. He wants us to think beyond today and into eternity. So Solomon comes to this place where he begins to start thinking about that and leading us to those thoughts. Ecclesiastes 2:24. There is nothing better for a purpose than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also is from the hand of God. If you are blessed, you say, where did the blessing come from? If you have sufficient to eat, where did it come from? If you have a roof over your head, where did it come from? And then he says, I see and I saw this is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? And he's saying, instead of all these pursuits to try and get enjoyment, understand that if you have any enjoyment, it comes from the hand of God. If you are blessed in any way, it comes from the hand of God. Yes, he may have given you the talents to use for those purposes, but it comes from the hand of God. And that's where fulfillment comes. And God's not opposed to you life. He's opposed to you enjoying or attempting to enjoy life and ignore the giver of life. Ecclesiastes 2:26. For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But notice this next line. To the sinner, he has given the business of gathering and collecting. The sinner is always, is that all there is? Is that all there is? And never finding peace. But to the one who honors God, he's given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner, he's given the business of gathering and collecting, only to give to one who pleases God. In other words, it's all going to go. And then this is also vanity and striving after the wind. Now in the New Testament, Paul put it this way. He wraps up the same kind of thinking as Ecclesiastes. Here's what he says. What do I gain if, humanly speaking, I fought with beasts at Ephesus, if the dead are not raised, if there's not that eternal perspective, if there isn't life after physical life on earth? What do I gain? What do I gain if I build buildings? What do I gain if I gather money? What do I gain if I have wine, women, and song, and I do everything, I did it my way? What do I gain? Nothing. Because it all would be vanity. But when I have my life right with God, what do I gain if, humanly speaking, I fought with beasts as Ephesus, if the dead are not raised? Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. But indeed, the dead are raised. And so you have to decide how you live your life, as unto yourself or as unto God, and the acknowledgement of a Creator who wants us to have a response to him, or simply doing the impulses of your own heart. And this is where he's leading us in the book of Ecclesiastes. And it does not matter how much you learn, what you do, or what you have. If you end up missing God, you will come to a point where you will say, vanity of vanities, and you will be chasing the wind. And I pray none of us are chasing the wind, because the truth of the matter is you'll never catch it. And this is where the author of Ecclesiastes is trying to lead us. The vain life is life without God and life without meaning. Let's pray together. Father, help us to see that you give us purpose and direction and reason, and you give us a picture of eternity. And therefore our lives are not lived in vain. May we see that clearly as we go through this book. And may each of us that we will serve the living God. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, and God bless you.